Hey, welcome in. I'm Rita, and this is the story I'm telling myself. If you've ever felt like you're standing in your own way, you are not alone. Let's get into it. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Story I'm Telling Myself podcast. I am so happy to have you with us today. And my apologies to my Facebook friends, because I don't know why Facebook and StreamYard cannot get their act together, but it is continually a battle, and we have lost our Facebook connection again today. Oh, well. Welcome our guest today. Dimple Dhabalia is with us, and we want to make her feel welcome, and we want to welcome everyone else who's here for the live recording. So if you are joining us live today, jump in the comments, say hello, welcome Dimple, welcome your fellow listeners, and be sure that you are sharing your insights. You know, we do this show for you. We love having you in the comments with us. So make sure that that you jump in and converse with us. Dimple, welcome. I'm so happy to have you with us today.
Thank you. Thanks so much for having me. I'm happy to be here.
Oh, wonderful. Well, please introduce yourself to all of our listeners.
My name is Dimple Dhabalia. I am a writer, a speaker, an artist, and I'm the founder of Roots in the Clouds. I'm also the author of Tell Me My Story, Challenging the Narrative of Service Before Self, and the creator of a new line of empathy cards.
And a great book. Great book. If you have not checked out Dimple's book, and let's see, you've left Substack. Where are you again now? What your
Oh, yeah,
platform?
I did leave Substack and I wrote an essay about why. So if you're curious, please definitely, I can send the link for the show notes about that. But you can find all my writing. I've moved to a new platform called Ghost. So the platform itself is not new, it's new to me. But it's actually now an extension of my website. So it's just journal.rootsintheclouds.com.
Perfect. Journal.rootsinthecloud. And here it is. Rootsinthecloud.com is how you can connect with Dimple, and you can follow her work. It is worthy of your time to sign up, to subscribe. And she is a not only a really good storyteller. I mean, Dimple, you are a very good storyteller, but you also really get into depth of thinking that is missing so much in our modern society. And I really appreciate that greatly. When I read your work, it takes me to a deeper level of self.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. Yeah, I think it's important. I think that it's funny. I've been thinking a lot lately about the language that we use for things, right? And I think it's really important. And so I've been really on a mission to use the right terminology for things. So, for example, so much of what we experience gets lumped under the umbrella of burnout, for example. And I have been really adamant about using words like moral injury and institutional betrayal and collective grief, because I think it also changes the responsibility. And so,
Oh,
like in my book, I talk about challenging the narrative of service before self, because I think that most of us who go into um, sectors where we're serving other human beings, there's this kind of unspoken agreement that that serving it comes before everything else, and service is so important. But we know that if we run ourselves into the ground, we can't show up to serve. But historically, what's happened is that burden has been placed on the individual, especially when terms like burnout are used. It makes it seem like it's something that we have to address on our own, when really it should be a shared responsibility. And so by using terms like moral injury and vicarious trauma and collective grief and institutional betrayal, we are shifting the narrative to say, no, these are systemic rooted issues. They're not individual to me, but they're part of some of the systemic problems that we have and that we need to address. And so, yeah, so that's why so much of my work is rooted in like using the terminology so that people, we help to normalize it and hopefully shift that perspective from the individual to the collective.
Well, and you are just reminding me and our listeners of all the amazing conversations we could be having together. We've chosen one of those topics for today, but obviously you need to come back again, Dimple, because you're hitting on some important themes. Sharon is with us. Wonderful to have you with us, Sharon. Sharon is a prolific reader. So, Sharon, if you have not found Dimple's book yet, I know it's going to be on your stand. We'll probably see a picture on LinkedIn of that. And Jackie, great to have you back with us today. Christy is with us as well. Hey, Christy, great to have you with us. These are our loyal listeners that come back week after week after week and jump in the comments. And that is, it is invaluable to me that you guys keep showing up and participating in the conversation. So thank you. So we're going to talk about a relationship with grief today, Dimple. And the story that we often tell ourselves. And as somebody who's been on your own journey, your of finding your way with grief, you have your own, but you also have elevated and studied grief at the collective level. Talk to us a little bit. Let's start with, what are some of the most common stories we tell ourselves about grief that actually inhibit our ability to navigate grief the way that would be more healthy for us?
Well, that's a great question. So I think one of the biggest misconceptions, and it's not actually, I shouldn't even say misconception, it's conditioning, right? We have been conditioned to believe that grief is a personal issue that's meant to be dealt with on our own, that it's private, that it's something that we need to just move through. And, we've seen, especially here in the West, that previously the writing there was on grief was about how grief was like this linear thing, with these stages that you move through. And there was this expectation that, like, if you weren't moving through the stages fast enough, that there was something wrong with you. And I mean, most of us realize that that's not the case. Grief is certainly not linear. It's very much this twisty, turny experience that we move through, and some days are better than others. And I hosted this launch event for these empathy cards that I just put out about seasons of grief and loss. And part of that, what was interesting was that there were so many people in the group that were grieving so many different things. And so I think that's another thing that we often don't realize, is that we tend to associate grief with the loss of a loved one, but grief is so much broader than that. And grief really exists at the threshold of every change, right? Every time we
Yes.
move through some kind of change, we're grieving something that's being left behind. And even if it's something good, there's a loss. And so anytime we have a loss, there's grief that goes with that. And we've been conditioned to just move through it or push past it, not acknowledge it. And
I'm going to pause there for just a second, because I think you're right. And I have two reflections that I want to share. We'll start with the first one that came to me. And that is, I did not experience this personally, but when you watch movies from the 19th century, for example, of times that are happening in the 19th century in American culture, grief was an event. You covered the mirrors in the house. The widow wore black for a year. There were these certain standards and rituals that were followed. And I'm not sure the history of why or when we separated ourselves from that, but it was a very public thing. And then you mentioned that it's a very private and personal thing. But I do think in our history, there was a time when it was a more public thing. And then for some reason, we turned it into this personal thing. And when we turned it into this personal thing, it was like we were supposed to protect other people around us from having to get pulled into it with us.
That's exactly it. Like, how many times do we go, like, if we're grieving something and someone says to us, "Oh, well, how are you doing?" Our automatic answer is, "Oh yeah, you know what? I'm good. I'm fine." Right? Because we feel like we have to make sure other people are comfortable. with our grief, even though we're the ones in the middle of it. And to your question, yes, or your statement about how there was a time where it was more public, absolutely. And I think I attribute everything back to industrialization. If anyone who knows my work knows that this is where I always go, because I think that was a really big turning point for us. Up until then, I think even within this country, people were still tied to some of their historical roots, like their cultural roots. And so most cultures around the world have rituals around death and grieving and things like that. But in this like space that we have created together here, and then when industrialization came in, so there were so many good things, right? With industrialization, there was, the idea was to create standardization, to create efficiency, and all of that. Okay, fine. And when you think about factory settings and whatnot, maybe that is a model that's useful. The problem is that that model was then lifted out of that space and put over every other industry,
Yes.
right? And the
Yes.
problem
Yes.
is that
Every other
especially
part of our lives became about output.
exactly,
We replaced connectivity, community, culture with output. Like
exactly,
the prioritization of those things shifted, and output became the primary.
right.
I see exactly what you're saying, Dimple.
Yeah.
Yes.
And as a result, there was disconnection. So we not only disconnected from each other, right? But because of what we were expected to do. So now there were more standardized, like, you work from 8 to 5 and you get 1 hour for lunch at this time, and you get these 2 15-minute breaks. And so all of a sudden we were disconnected from our bodies, because now we're not listening to when our body is saying, oh, I'm hungry, or I'm tired, or I need to use the bathroom. We are like, oh, we have to fit into this little box of whatever. And so,
What a great point.
yeah.
Yes.
And
So
so, because
we stopped telling ourselves it was okay to listen to our bodies and do what our bodies said.
exactly.
And the
And so
story
that's
that we
how
told
that
ourselves is
conditioning,
we needed to fit into the machine.
exactly. And that's how that conditioning got built. And so, even with grief, you think about like in most modern workplaces, especially in the West, bereavement is like you get a day or 2 days maybe, right? Bereavement leave. But like that's not like
Well,
what you're supposed to.
and only for certain classes of relationship to you. You don't get
Exactly.
bereavement for your pet, even though pets are there's so much love exchanged
Yeah.
between a person and a pet.
Yeah.
Right, but there's no acknowledgement of that. I think about when my dad's sister passed away, that he was so incredibly close to. I I wasn't as close to her, but I felt like I needed to be there to support him in his grief. But she wouldn't, in a very traditional tight definition at work, she would not be a close enough relative for me to. I could take a personal day,
Right.
but I could not have bereavement leave for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Well, and I think so there's that piece of it, right? So again, the language that we use and how we look at this. Um, and so when you're told, oh, you get a day to grieve or whatever, that's like another message that, okay, that's your time. And then you need to figure this out. We don't need it here in this space. And so as a result, I think like people don't know how to hold space for others coming back in. And I will say from my experience that when I came back to work after my mom passed away, I was just like out of it. That was a huge loss for me. She was my best friend. She was such a huge part of my life. And to suddenly have that gone and then to go back to work felt so surreal because,
Yeah.
and we talk about sometimes that these losses are forms of trauma, right? Like trauma is a defining line, right? When we experience a trauma, we now move into a space where there's life before the trauma and life after the trauma. And so it's the same thing with loss, that when we experience that kind of loss. And so to show back up to whether it's a workplace or a community space or something, and to have people either not acknowledge it or not know how to acknowledge it or just move on like as if nothing has changed, it's very jarring, and it's very isolating. And so when we think about, like, I talk a lot about how there's a loneliness that goes with grief that's different than other kinds of loneliness. And so to your original question about things that, we don't often think about or understand, or stories around this, like, I think that we don't have to be in that loneliness. Like, we're creating it as a culture. But what our ancestors knew was that we were never meant to move through grief alone, or any season of life alone. We were meant to be in community, and to encounter those things together. And so that's like part of what I'm hoping that the work that I'm doing will help create, is more of these spaces and ways to talk to each other, to restore that language of connection.
Well, I certainly understand the loneliness piece that you were talking about. And that loneliness for me, when I lost my dad at the end of 2024, was that was the start of this podcast. That is what brought about this podcast, because I needed community, but I didn't want to go find a grief group and talk with strangers. The community I needed was just a chance to be with the people I already knew, but in ways that didn't have anything to do with the productivity, just being in conversation, just being right. So I had thought at times about a podcast before, but I knew this was the right creative project, and it would not necessarily have been the case if I were not sitting in the loneliness of having lost him.
100%. And there's something really beautiful about what you just described, which is that when we think about creating community, right? Community, to your point, doesn't have to be a bereavement group or a grief group, which are great. I think for the people that they work for, they're great. And there's other ways to create community, but the idea is gathering together, or even if it's not that you can gather in person, right? It's these rituals of connection and care,
Yes.
right? And so there's so many ways that we can foster these moments of care for each other, so that when we are in those moments, and part of being in community is about sharing our stories. And so the story I'm telling myself, like, that's a really powerful question. And there's neuroscience around what happens when we share our stories with each other, right? There's a neurobiological process that's taking place with cortisol and with norepinephrine and other like hormones in our body that help us feel a deeper sense of connection when we share our stories with each other. And that's why we talk about that when we've experienced something that again takes us to that place of loneliness, because we feel like we have to hold it into ourselves. When we actually speak those words out loud, or write them, or whatever it is, and share them with other people, we help to remove like the shame or stigma or anything else that's been keeping us separated from others. And what often happens is that in those spaces, you hear from other people who are experiencing something similar. And so going back to the event that I held last weekend, or the weekend before, I can't remember now. What was interesting to me was it was the 7th anniversary of my mom's passing. There were so many other people in that group who also were experiencing an anniversary of some kind of loss. And so as we kind of talk through what our experiences were, by the end, people were saying that, they were walking away feeling like that they had been seen, or that they had been in this space with others who were also experiencing something similar to them, And so I think that there's something really powerful about that, about why we want to gather in community.
Yes. And so your family culture, as as a person from whose family originated from India, you had certain rituals. So talk to us a little bit about the reconciliation and the story shift in your own mind about all the messages that you were getting from Western culture, and then reconnecting with your Eastern culture and the difference in the story that allowed for you, and then the behavior that allowed for you.
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think, it's interesting because in the last few years, I've been looking back over my life and realizing how much of my life was grief. And it was because there were so many, we move through life here with this idea of self-sufficiency, and you know we have to have the strength to do things on our own, otherwise we're
Mhm.
somehow failing, and we're not failing, right? Again, we weren't supposed to do this stuff alone. And so that was what I was getting through, like, school and media and other things. And then on this side with my family, I grew up in Denver, and we didn't have, like, all my parents' families were siblings and parents were in other countries. And so my dad's side was all in India, my mom's side was mostly in Canada and London. And so we only saw them, maybe in summers or maybe every other summer. And so we had really created, like, a second family through a lot of the other Indian families that were there in town, right? And so I had that in my formative years. I had that sense of community and being together and moving through. I think about, like, holidays and the things that we were together every weekend. And so, everyone's birthdays, everyone's major, like, milestones, and then when there were losses, people gathered. I remember when my dad got sick and he was in the hospital for almost 2 months. I think I was in first grade, and how the community rallied around us. And so there was always someone at the hospital with my mom, and there was someone always at home with my sister and I. And it was right around the time of my birthday. And so, like, they didn't want to cancel our birthday, like my birthday party. And so these friends showed up to make sure that that happened. And so that, like, when you think about, like, we've heard over the last several years, like, it takes a village to raise a child or whatever, but it takes a village to live as a human being. And I think that the more that we can, like, come back to that and be open, right? But we do get these conflicting messages. And so I think it's really important, the more of us that stand up and say, no, like, I think we should do this together, or, hey, I need help. That's, like, the hardest thing to say, right? Is I'm really struggling, can I talk to you? Can we be together in this space and maybe not say anything for a little while, because that's what I need. Like, we don't tell people what we need. We either expect them to know, or we just shove it all down. And what I will say is, in this moment of time, especially post-COVID, people have so much grief that they don't even realize maybe that they're holding. And just because we don't acknowledge it doesn't mean it goes away. It settles into our body. There's just more and more studies coming out about the impact of holding grief and stress and other things in our bodies, and the impact on, like, autoimmune and other things. And so we don't do ourselves any favors by thinking that we're just, we're strong enough to hold this ourselves. I'm not saying you're not strong, but again, you weren't supposed to hold it yourself. You were always meant to share it with other people.
I do think there is a story that we tell ourselves in Western culture, that don't let other people see you cry. You know what I mean? Like there is a bit of that story. And I remember talking with my stepmother after my dad passed away about feeling burdensome to share your grief with other people. And I think some of that is what Glennon Doyle writes so beautifully about we the friend coming alongside somebody in grief. We give ourselves the job of saving them from their grief,
Yeah.
instead of giving ourselves the job of sitting with them. in their grief. And so I think we do carry a lot of misconceptions or misperceptions about what the right way is to maneuver. I have sat there needing to write the sympathy message to somebody in my friend circle who has lost a parent, and knowing there are no words sufficient enough now that I have experienced that myself, and not wanting to be trite, but not knowing what to say. The name of the episode is, why do I have such a hard time with grief? But it does. It feels tension,
Yeah.
instead of ease. And you created your empathy cards. That's your new creative project, I think, trying to help us find some ease in our relationship with grief. Share with us a little bit about your insight about why we have such tension and where we can find our ease.
I mean, I think you just said all of it. So number one, I think it's very much a Western thing to want to fix things, right? Like it's human nature, but it's a very Western thing to go in and want to fix someone's grief or fix their pain, right? And this is where I think, again, these rituals that other cultures practice are about being with people. And so this is one of the things that I was thinking about when I was creating these cards is that um, I, I don't want sympathy, right? So I'm not using the word sympathy anymore because sympathy to me is a language of platitudes. Sympathy is like it's a very uh, it's not like it's temporary. It's a temporary language of platitudes so that, in the moment we say, oh, I'm so sorry for your loss, thoughts and prayers, all those things that we hear in the immediate aftermath of a loss, right? Empathy and sympathy creates a wall because we feel for someone, right? Empathy is feeling with someone. And so empathy is where we say things like, I don't have the words and I haven't been in your position, but I can appreciate what you must be going through and I'm here with you. Or, and I think a lot of times people think of empathy and they think, oh my God, or even with grief, right? Like in general, people think, well, I don't want to say or do the wrong thing. But the reality
Right.
is that as humans, we want to feel seen and supported. And so I often describe empathy as a ministry of presence. It's about being present to another person in that moment. And that often doesn't require anything except just being there with them, right? It's not
I
our job
really
to fix
love those
it.
words, a ministry of presence.
Yeah.
That's
And it's
powerful.
thank you. But it's not our job to fix it. It's not our job to change it. It's not any of those things, which are difficult jobs, right? But that's not what we're there to do. We're there to witness what they're going through and acknowledge it, right? And I can't tell you the number of times we're just doing that, just acknowledging that someone is going through something. You see the surprise on their face sometimes where they're like, um, oh, yeah, like, thank you, like, because I'm not telling them like, oh, you should do this or you should do that. But yeah, you know what? I'm here with you. I I'm just going to be with you. And that was the thing, like when my mom passed away and what inspired these cards was that in the immediate aftermath, I got all kinds of sympathy cards and I was really grateful because people had thought of me. But often with grief, in the initial moments, we're kind of in shock. The real like work of grief starts down the line. And by then everybody's gone, right? Which just adds to that
Right.
loneliness. And so I had this group of friends who a month after my mom passed away, I got an envelope in the mail and it was filled with all these beautiful little notes of encouragement and love and nothing about like what I should do or anything like that. It just met me in that moment. And it was so meaningful. And then the following month, I got another packet like that. And then the following month, and this went on for 6 months. And it was so just, it left such an impression with me And it meant so much to me because they weren't there to fix anything. They were just acknowledging that, yes, my mom had been here. Yes, there was a huge loss in my life, and I'm probably having, some good days, some bad days. And it just it left me feeling like, oh, there are people in this world who see me in this moment. And so with the cards that I created, it's the idea is one box for one person. And so there's 6 cards in a box, but the idea is that all 6 are shared with one person over time, right? And it's that idea of how do we build connection? We build it intentionally, slowly, over time with each other.
And it's that reminder that because we can get on with our lives and it's so quick and easy to lose sense of time that has elapsed. I want to just go real quickly to the comments. I want to acknowledge Gary's with us from the UK. Hey, Gary, I see you. I see you, Lisa, and Ruth from Indiana. So great to have you with us, Ruth. So Kelly Blackman, who is going to kick off season 3 of The Story I'm Telling Myself, as a return guest. He said he hadn't considered that sympathies are used differently in different parts of the world. And I want to dig into this thing with sympathy. And Gail, I think it says this so well. My experience is much sympathy has not really been about me. It's that performative. Sympathy can feel very performative when it is received, and sometimes even when we're giving it, because again, we tell ourselves that we don't that we have to say something, and we go to the trite things because this is what people say, and it's kind of easy.
I call it, it's inherited language.
It is, yes. You're correct about that. I want to talk about this because we were talking about different places in your life. I think about when my first daughter went off to college, there was a moment of real grief for me about that. I think about when I left my corporate job and my corporate identity. I grieved. Who am I if I don't have this corporate identity anymore? Like what, but my work meant so much to me, and I hadn't defined yet my own business. And so I was in a place of grief with that. I think about my sister going through her cancer diagnosis, and she never wanted people's sympathy. So she worked so hard to hide that. But I know she was grieving all of the loss of normalcy in her life. I know the struggle that she was having, trying to keep up appearances and not feeling the energy to make a meal at the end of the day, but needing to make a meal for her family and put it on the table. Like those kinds of real struggles, but not wanting people to show her sympathy. She did not want their sympathy. But I think what you're offering in your definition of empathy is something quite different. And so I imagine all of these different places where this practice of empathy that you are offering to us, Dimple, is not just ease for us, but it is an act of service, of love, of community to the people that we care about in our lives.
Yeah, I call it love in action.
Absolutely.
Yeah, it 100% is. It is. I think that I'm not surprised at your sister-in-law.
Yes, sister.
Your sister's reaction. I think most people who are going through something, we don't want the sympathy, right? And the other thing you described, though, is I think in a lot of these situations, there's also this idea of anticipatory grief, right? So I think about caregivers in particular, or people who have been diagnosed with some kind of illness, right? There's this anticipation of what's coming and what's changing. And sometimes like that can be so painful. And again, people, we just have never been taught how to be with people in those moments. And another thing I keep writing about is just like how much dehumanization there is in the world right now. And it really, it makes me so sad. Like, I'm such an empath. I take in so much and of what's happening in the world. And it makes me so sad to see it. And I think that that's also the part that makes it hard for us to connect to each other is, I think if we could just go back to this idea of I'm a human being, you're a human being, um, and you're hurting right now, let me see like how I can be with you in this moment without trying to fix it, without trying to change it, but just be with you. And that's again, this sympathy creates this wall between us. And it leads to the feeling of isolation and loneliness, whereas empathy creates a connection that makes us feel seen and heard and supported.
One of the other things that you said that I want to share a little bit of my personal story or experience with is you talked about in your grief asking for what you need. And that is something, it's so easy for us to tell ourselves that people are showing up for us and we have no right to direct their energy or those kinds of things. But my father was a very religious man. The first person to pass was his second wife, my first stepmother. And when she passed away, I remember going to the people in his church that organize all of the funeral stuff and saying, please don't overload us with food. He's going to be one person in the house. He only has so much space in the freezer. We do not need all of that right now, but we're all going to leave because none of us lived in the same town or state with him.
Mm-hmm.
We are all leaving him within the next 10 days. And that's when he's going to need you to show up with food. That's when he's going to need you to invite him out to eat.
Mm-hmm.
That's when he's going to need you to give him a call and see if you can come spend some time with him. So please, thank you for all the love. But would you please spread the word that we want people to put that into the back end when we're all gone instead of overwhelming us with too much stuff right now.
Yeah.
And then when he passed, I did the same thing for his second wife, and said, thank you. We have all that we can take in right now, but she's going to need this community.
Yeah.
When he is gone, please ask and invite all those people to make sure that they are taking care of her in that time. And people were very happy, right, to receive that and do as asked. And
sorry, I was just gonna say, like, I think that's just it. Like, you named the story earlier. The story we tell ourselves is that if I ask for what I need, I'm being a burden. That story of being a burden is so deeply ingrained in our culture. But the reality is, if you put yourself on the other side of it, when we are at a loss and we're not sure how to help, we feel helpless, right? We know someone's hurting, we know they're grieving, we feel helpless in what we can do to help. And so when someone says, "Oh, here's what I actually need," there's actually this element of like, "Oh, great. Now I know what I can do." So like I really encourage people.
Well, and for somebody like my dad, for him to be throwing food out because it didn't get eaten, I mean, that would have been hurtful to him. Like he would not want to do that.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's, it was kind of saving on both sides of it.
Yeah.
And we've all seen the movies. We all know that overwhelm, especially in a Southern culture, which I grew up in the South, of all the casseroles that come in and it's all love and it's all well-meaning.
For sure. And I want to say that about sympathy too. I don't say that as a means to shaming anyone. Like I think that there's value in sympathy in that it does let the other person know that you were thinking of them. Even if it is performative, there's still an element of you have to think of them to do the thing. But I think there's a difference between that temporary platitude-based sympathy versus, this ongoing connection through empathy.
Yeah, and I think I'm projecting. I mean, for me, the word for me, when I'm in that moment and I need to respond to somebody, and all of the platitudes are going through, all that conditioned, what do people say? That's when that's when for me the performative flag goes up within myself. And I'm like, dig deeper, Rita. What do what is something really meaningful that you can say in this moment?
Yeah.
And Gail just reminded us about births, deaths, any life transitions, but birth is another one of those places where right after the birth people swarm, but then when the mom really needs the help, it's often in the 6, 8, 12 weeks down the line.
Yeah.
Right. And you are not late if you're showing up.
No, actually, it's funny that you said that because, one of the women who showed up on Saturday, she wrote to me afterwards and she said, the biggest thing I took away from this is, she said, I have often felt so much guilt because I didn't get a card out in time after someone passed away. And I send it 2 or 3 months later. And I always feel so bad about not being there in time. And one of the things I put on social media, that it's not the card that arrives first, it's the one that keeps coming, right? And so
Right.
so she said she walked away like with this idea that, oh, maybe it's actually helpful when I accidentally sent this, 2, 3 months later, that person kind of felt supported in that moment because they got something, after everyone else had gone quiet. So yeah, totally.
Well, I hate to say that we are out of time, but we are out of time for this particular conversation. Rootsinthecloud.com. We'll also have a direct link to order the cards and for you, but you can go to rootsinthecloud.com and make your own path there, but check the show notes. Dimple, this has been everything that I hope this conversation would be. And thank you so much for joining us today. And friends, those of you that came to the live, thank you for all of your interaction over in the comments. Yes. Dimple and I will make our way over to LinkedIn in the next 48 hours or so and try to respond to some of your comments. And make sure that you share this episode, whether you want to share the live link or you want to wait for it to come out. Share this with some other people. I just feel like Dimple has something so profound for us to contemplate and take in. And our community can be a big part of helping her message reach more people. So thank you so much, Dimple. And we're going to have to come back and talk again about some of these other things that you're writing about. So don't be surprised when I'm hitting you up to come back next year. I'm such a fan of your work, and thank you so much for what you are bringing into the world. Come back again next week. Meet my friend Alexia, who is working in bringing more happiness into our lives. And, that is something that I'm always down for. Not that it's the only feeling that we have, but it is good to find your path to happiness. So don't miss next week's episode. I'll see you back here. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. If you love this episode, leave us those 5 stars and be sure to share this with a friend. And if you didn't, don't worry about it. See you back here next week.